Haile Selassie was Emperor of Ethiopia from 1930 to 1974. He is widely considered to be a defining figure in modern Ethiopian and African history, as well as the key figure of Rastafari, a religious movement in Jamaica that emerged shortly after he became emperor in the 1930s. Keep watching to learn more about Haile Selassie and his Ethiopian empire. Please also don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button. It helps our channel grow and allows us to make more videos like this one. No other African leader during the independence era was revered as much as Emperor Haile Selassie of Ethiopia. In the 1930s, his act of defiance against Mussolini's invasion earned him international fame. He had ruled Ethiopia since 1916 and was emperor from 1930. In his early years, he banned slavery, improved infrastructure by building roads, schools, hospitals, and a railway to the Red Sea, and allowed for the establishment of a parliament. After living in exile in England during the Italian occupation of Ethiopia in the 1930s, he was restored to his throne in the 1940s and became a symbol of an Africa free from colonial rule, an aspiration of all nationalist leaders at that time. He was well respected by many world leaders and generally considered an elder statesman. In Africa, he hosted the founding of the Organization of African Unity and served as its first chairman. Rastafarians in Jamaica saw Haile Selassie as a divine being, and christened him Jah. This religion formed in the 1930s, taking its name from Selassie's original title Rastafari. When he visited Jamaica for 3 days in 1966, some of the locals believed that miracles had transpired during his stay. After the war, he created a civilian administration and constructed a large army, the biggest in sub-Saharan Africa. The new army had 4 divisions, an elite bodyguard, and a well-equipped air force with jet fighters. Although some things did change, the fundamental character of his regime remained the same. For example, Haile Selassie continued to govern as an autocratic monarch who gave out titles, appointments, and land in order to gain loyal subjects. The royal palaces in Addis Ababa were where all government decisions originated. Anything related to education, healthcare, transportation and more would have his name attached to it. He was even featured on the country's currency. His birthday, along with the anniversary of his coronation and return from exile, were all holidays that everyone celebrated. The emperor's power was largely upheld by the fact that he, together with key players in the Coptic Church and provincial aristocratic families, owned a majority of the land. This gave them control over the livelihoods of millions of tenant farmers who worked on said land. The 1967 Civil Code of Ethiopia demanded that tenants give landlords 75% of their crops, provide free labor for the landlord's farm, transport the landlord's crops at no cost, cut firewood for the landlord gratis, and serve as his guards and cooks without compensation. Moreover, tenants were also responsible for building the landlord's granaries at no cost to him. In areas where peasants had specific skill sets like pottery, weaving, or metalwork, they were legally required to provide these services for free. Constantly living in fear of eviction, tenants lived difficult lives. Although he seemed unassuming, Haile Selassie was actually quite aggressive to those who opposed him and was constantly looking to expand his empire. This opportunity came when the Italians were defeated in 1941 and thus ceded control of their African colony, Eritrea. When its future came up for discussion, Selassie was quick to assert himself. The United Nations eventually decided to establish a federation between Ethiopia and Eritrea where the Ethiopian government would preside over foreign affairs, defense, finance, commerce and ports, while Eritrea could have its own elected government to handle local matters and have its own national flag and languages in the form of Tigrinya and Arabic. However, it didn't take long for Selassie's ambitions for complete unification to manifest. In 1958, the Eritrean flag was removed and in 1959 Ethiopian law was extended to Eritrea. There were a number of other changes which followed. Political parties were banned, labor unions destroyed, censorship instated, and Amharic became the dominant language over Tigrinya and Arabic. From then on, Haile Selassie's treatment of Eritrea was no different from any of the other 13 provinces of Ethiopia. Selassie's grip on power only strengthened. No minister dared to take any decision of consequence without first obtaining the fakad, his approval. His photographic memory allowed him to recall names, faces, conversations, and past events with ease. The Minister of the Pen always accompanied him during audiences and inspection tours, standing close by or a few steps behind. The minister was responsible for taking down any orders or instructions, recording appointments and dismissals, and his signature rather than the emperor's appeared on published laws, decrees and treaties. Haile Selassie stayed up to date by constantly receiving secret intelligence and gossip. In private audiences, ministers were encouraged to tell him what their colleagues were doing. Officials vied for his attention, vying to provide him with the best information they had. At the Jubilee Palace, where he lived, he took an early morning walk in the park every day, stopping by the cages of lions and leopards to feed them with chunks of meat handed to him by an aide. He would listen to intelligence reports from officials who ran his spy networks as he walked along. Each day, different officials would appear at a tradition known as perished.This, or waiting at the gate. This was in hopes of progressing their agenda or currying favor. The key to any sort of advancement lay in displaying loyalty and servitude to the emperor, traits which he was not shy about rewarding. He not only gave out appointments, titles, land grants and salary increases to loyal officials, but also showered them with gifts of money, houses and cars. Those who served him well were rewarded with scholarships, free medical treatment or foreign holidays. However, those unfaithful ones he brought down by expropriating their assets and ruining their reputation. Dignitaries and officials bowed as he entered the audience hall each day, hoping to be noticed by the Grand Palace's ruler. As he took his place on the old imperial throne, dwarfed by its size, an official pillow bearer swiftly slid a pillow under his feet to ensure that his legs were not left hanging in the air. The bearer, who accompanied the emperor everywhere he went, kept a store of 52 pillows of various sizes, thicknesses and materials to cover every eventuality. By July 1972, Haile Selassie was 80 years old and becoming part of Africa's dinosaur generation. He was still clinging to pomp, protocol, and a system of personal rule even though it was no longer an effective way to govern. His memory wasn't as sharp as it used to be. The emperor would sometimes appear lost and confused. Aklilu Abderwald, his longtime prime minister, found that no matter how many times an issue had been hashed out, it had to be revisited each time from scratch. When drought and famine overtook the province of Wollo in 1973, claiming the lives of tens of thousands of peasants, the government, though aware of the disaster, made little attempt to alleviate it, nor did they seek help from international agencies for fear of damaging the country's reputation. The inaction to the famine in Wollo resulted in a series of other revolts and protests occurring in the months that followed across Ethiopia. From army officers disgruntled over basic living and pay conditions to teachers demanding higher pay and taxi drivers protesting against fuel price increases. The old aristocratic establishment remained resolute and paid little heed to the demands of the civilians and armed forces. They attempted no reform and instead turned to loyal units of the army for help in curbing the strikes and demonstrations. However, junior officers within the armed forces met at 4th Division headquarters with the aim to take control of the country. They formed a military committee, consisting of 108 representatives which they called the Derg. For an extended period of time, the Derg kept their members and activities under wraps from everyone. The Derg released a statement on the 4th of July 1974, vowing allegiance to the emperor and saying that its main objectives were to support the crown and make sure the civilian government ran smoothly. The slogan it adopted, Ethiopia Tikdom, or Ethiopia First, was conveniently vague. But, after gaining confidence along the way, the Derg slowly took apart the imperial structure. In July and August, it published extensive lists of names of palace staff members, high-ranking government officials and well-known aristocrats, including Haile Selassie's most trusted advisors, ordering them to turn themselves in or lose their possessions. Though most surrendered of their own accord, some were forcefully detained. Hundreds found themselves crammed into basement cells beneath the Grand Palace so tightly that they could only sleep in shifts by lying on the hard-packed dirt floors. Haile Selassie was left with only a few personal servants. The Derg's next target was the emperor himself. In government press and media outlets, countless attacks were launched on the former regime, criticizing it for corruption and abuse. Haile Selassie was accused of spending the country's resources on lavish trips instead of helping those affected by the Wollo famine. The abolishments happened one by one: the Ministry of the Pen, the Crown Council, the Cello, and lastly, the Emperor's private exchequer. In addition, royal investments in places such as St. George Brewery and Addis Ababa's bus company were taken over as well. On the 25th of August, the Jubilee Palace was nationalized and renamed the National Palace. This meant that Haile Selassie would have no say in his exit strategy. At a 4-day secret meeting held in early September, the Derg voted to dethrone him. On September 11th, 9 princesses were forced into a dungeon-like cell. These included the emperor's only surviving daughter and 7 granddaughters. The captives had their heads shaved and were given only 2 mattresses to share between them all. On the same day, officers from the Derg interrogated Haile Selassie on where his fortune was located. He vehemently denied possessing any fortune. They suggested that he watch a film due to be shown on state television that night. The film, a British television documentary called The Hidden Famine, was an expose examining how thousands of men, women and children had been allowed to starve in Wollo the previous year. As the film played, it was cut with scenes of the emperor and company enjoying champagne, caviar and feeding his dogs from a silver tray. According to a servant's account, Haile Selassie watched until the very end before he sat in silence, lost in deep thought. The following morning, 3 Derg officers entered the room where Haile Selassie was waiting for them. The officers were dressed in combat uniforms. After a preliminary bow, one of them read out the proclamation dethroning him. When asked about the revolution that was overthrowing him, Haile Selassie replied that he supported it if it benefited the people. A green Volkswagen was waiting in the palace driveway to escort Selassie. The driver, an officer, opened the door and held up the front seat so that Haile Selassie could get in the back. Huddled in the back seat, he was driven through the empty streets of Addis Ababa, where a curfew was in force, and disappeared through the gates of 4th Division barracks. Haile Selassie spent the last months of his life imprisoned in the rooms of the Grand Palace. He continued to get up at dawn, attended morning mass and spent a lot of time reading. He eventually died a prisoner on the 27th of August 1975. According to the Derg, the cause of death was circulatory failure. According to his followers, he was smothered with a wet pillow. His body was buried beneath the latrine in the palace, remaining hidden there for 16 years. In 1992 his body was exhumed and his coffin rested in Bata Church for nearly a decade. On the 5th of November 2000, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church gave Haile Selassie an official funeral. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church still considers him its head, and Rastafarians the world over still worship Haile Selassie as God incarnate.